Let's see if YouTube came. Yeah, YouTube came up. Beautiful. All right. All right. I think we're just about ready to start. Hey, everyone. Well, new. My name is Todd Cochrane. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Rob Greenlee. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing terrific, Todd. It's great to be back. We're doing this on Riverside, so it's awesome.
I'm out here in Honolulu. Currently, I had a dermatologist appointment yesterday to have a spot removed on my back, which, according to the dermatologist, was quite concerning.
Oh,
So I'm anxiously awaiting to see if I got melanoma or not. So
wow. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, so that's not a fun thing to be waiting for. But
No.
my father had lots of these little spots or whatever they were, and I'm just
Hmm.
it's a scare. If not, I'll be probably. I'm leaving to come back to Detroit on Thursday afternoon. But if it turns out to be positive, then I'll be probably turning right around and come back here and doing surgery. So it's pretty scary what
Hmm.
they do. They take the segment of skin right down to the muscle if it's
Right.
cancerous.
Yeah.
So,
They want to get it
and then
all out,
hopefully
right?
it's at a early enough stage where I'm not dead in 5 years. But we'll see.
Er, there's nothing like being an early bird when it comes to cancer. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, and this spot's been on my back forever. So I said if it was going to kill me, it would, but yeah, who knows?
Hmm.
So we'll
Right.
see. Hoping for good news. But anyway, that's enough about me whining. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Todd. I'm getting better myself. Every day, getting stronger. Trying to stay focused. There's just so many different things going on in the medium right now that to get pulled into these days. It's like it's really hard to stay focused.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I don't
So
know.
Sean says after. Go ahead.
It's well. Go ahead. So you're going to say something about what a
Yeah,
comment?
Sean said in the chat room. After no, we need to know what mic Todd is using. Looks like a karaoke mic. Well, it's an ATR 21.
Y- Yeah, it's just an ATR. Yeah.
I'm just and this
Yep.
stupid light is shining weird, so I'm putting my hand over it so the light doesn't shine while we're doing video.
So you have a blue thumb. That's what that creates.
Exactly is, but yeah, I think we saw the announcement. Well, Facebook sent me a bunch of stuff today, and I have had very little time to look at the entire package of stuff. But I think they've officially announced that pages are available,
Hmm.
and see if I can pull some of this up without killing our stream here. Um, but
Yeah, and it's looking like that those folks may be joining us on the show next week. So
oh, okay,
yeah,
and they have
two people
information.
from Facebook. Right.
Oh, all right, that would be awesome. See if I can get this to open. So they've actually got a Facebook creators page. I don't know if can I share this on Riverside.fm. Let me look and see if I can actually page. And
I
I
think it does
think
have a
so.
screen share
Yes,
ability.
it
Right.
does. It
Right.
does. It does. But I've got so many screens open that. All right, let me try to see if I can do this without destroying everything. Whoops. Here's the page on Facebook. It says Facebook for creators, engage podcasts, grow your show through a social experience that drives discovery and fandom. And it talks about the requirements. And so, yeah, exciting stuff by them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think that there's some early indications that what these folks are doing, could make a big impact, um,
right.
in the short run. So
And
yeah.
so I did make sure that we were good there.
Mhm.
So there should be a lot of news coming out from a variety of news sources over the next, I would think, um, depending how many people
Mhm.
they sent this information to. But um, so I think that they're pretty serious about going with this.
Mhm. And it's
So
looking like, on the show next week, we'll have the product manager and the marketing manager for from Facebook.
oh, so we're gonna
On
have two on the show. How are we gonna? Guess we're
At
gonna
the
have to
same
figure out how
same
we.
way that we did it with, Google when we had Google on. Remember, we had, Zach, I mean, was it
Yeah.
Zach
So are
and
they
then
gonna?
the product manager. So I'm telling him to do a Skype conference. So
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that'll be. Um. All right. So there'll be two on one screen then, essentially.
correct. Yeah. But they should be able to talk, back and forth and talk with each other, all 4 of us. So, yeah.
Right.
So that should
But
work. But I thought it was interesting. James Cridland was busy this past couple days. He put out this new article about who invented the word podcast and kind of
oh,
told the timeline. And both you and I were consulted in this article, and just to make sure that it was as factually accurate as possible. And I contributed, some stuff from my side, because I go back to that time frame and was kind of involved a little bit in the beginning of the formation of podcasting, and I know you were too. I think we both announced. I thought it was interesting, and I didn't realize this because I don't think we compared notes, but we both announced podcasting, and you launched your podcast on the same day, October 9th, 2004. So,
really? So you did it in the same day?
well, I wrote a blog post article on my new website on October 9th, but I actually started, um, supporting the enclosure tag in my blog feed on September 15th, 16th,
Right. Right. Right.
which was a couple weeks, a few weeks prior to that. But didn't really talk about it on the show or do an episode about it until the October 9th, show. So, but I have a
You know, I
link to that episode. You can go listen to it right now if you want.
I think I can't play it on the show here because of the way we're set up today. But um, I think I think back to that time, and of course, I was in a hotel room in Waco, Texas, doing the first few episodes, and Movable Type at that time. Someone it wasn't too long before I don't remember if I hand coded the RSS the first
And that's what I had to
episode
do. I had
or
to actually type it into my
text
blog.
editor.
Yeah,
And I oh gosh. So I don't before Movable Type had some sort of a
like a
adaption.
plugin. Right.
They didn't really have plugins at that time.
Mhm.
Movable Type, and I don't know is mobile. Um,
I don't know.
they they some it was something like a plugin, but at some point there was some adaption. But I'm almost certain, yeah, almost certain I had to hand code the RSS feed in those early days. But what was amazing to me was how quickly things really exploded because do we actually know when iPodder actually was released? It was he talk about I think he talked about that in that app, but when it was the iPodder tool first
I believe if you look at the article, it says here, um, the Uparter, You know what? I'm not sure that it really says that precisely in here. The more I look at
So
it,
I'm
the
gonna do a
more I
Google for
see.
iPod or release date.
Yeah. Um, but James gives a lot of credit to the early popularization of the word podcast to Danny Gregoire, and Adam Curry does as well. So, because
I
Adam and Dave really didn't name podcasting.
No, no.
That was
But I think he
actually
did a
done.
good job of balancing that by person who used the word first and then who really unknowingly basically said, "Let's call it this." And so while it was mentioned, it wasn't adopted, and then upon the
Yeah. Yeah, the article that
it
appeared
hadn't
in The
been
Guardian, right, the article that appeared in The Guardian written by Ben Hammersley, who had been on my show, like, 6 months prior to him writing that article, he basically just referenced, like, 3 terms to potentially
right,
describe, on basically on-demand repurposed audio,
right,
and it basically that article went out, and for 5 months nothing happened, um, to connect it with any kind of a software client or technology or anything like that. In the meantime, people were still doing stuff. I mean, I was still doing my show, making it a download, and then my like 3 or 4 months later, I added enclosure tags to my blog feed, and I was podcasting. And really, to be totally honest about it, to me back then, it really wasn't a big deal.
right, right,
I was getting most of my audience from streaming and from direct downloading off my website and radio and satellite radio. So it was just, something new. It was something kind of interesting and cool, and I could
mhm,
see it having legs potentially long term. But at the time, it wasn't really a big revolution or anything like that. I don't
right.
think.
And I
Yeah.
think, though, if you read his timeline, which I think this is probably one of the most accurate ones that have been written,
Yeah.
to give him credit, because he went
Yeah.
out and pulled all the sources.
Hmm.
I think that there's really, if you think about it, again, the person that kind of coined it initially, the one that
Yeah. Ben
that mailing list, let's call it this, and then the popularization between Adam and
kind of took off from there.
was,
Right.
those
Right.
4 things was the thing that kind of that took it off. Now, the question I really have is, if we think about what Dave and Adam and Dave did, do you think that podcasting as we know it today would have gotten as much groundswell had it not been for Adam and Dave? Do you think that this thing would have kind of found its way on its own? I'm not
Well, I mean, I
know.
think if you think,
They had
yeah,
developers
Todd,
and
right. I think as you think back to that time, and I I do, and it's pretty clear in my mind, most of the early podcasters didn't like the name
well, that's true.
podcasts.
Well, that's why
Yeah, I
Blueberry is
mean,
called Blueberry. That's why it's not
right,
called podcast.com.
right, and there's also a lot of corollary stuff to that that created a little bit of bad blood, in the medium, because Apple was pretty aggressive in the market back then, basically sending out takedown notices to any company that had pod in their name.
That's right.
Back in that time frame. So it does show in the article, it says here, on September 16th, which is the same day that I put enclosure tag in my RSS feed for my radio show, Danny Gregoire wrote on the iPodder dev mailing list
There you go.
that, and I don't know, there's a snippet in here, and I don't know that
He
he
basically says,
actually,
let's call it podcast, and that kind of
right,
stuck.
podcaster. Yeah, he talked about it in the podcaster type of reference, and then the iPodder obviously is coined from the iPod, right?
Right,
So
right.
back in those days, the iPodder software primarily connected to, at least how people thought about it, connected, with your computer to an iPod through a wire,
It did
right?
also connect, well, it connected to
To
anything
right,
action. So it would
like
be
a
and
like a Windows Media Player too would do it.
right, or an iRiver
Right.
things that we were using, right? So I think
Well,
that,
the iRiver, though, I don't believe had a, piece of software that was written for it, though, was it? Or did it
no,
just
well,
create
yeah,
a folder on your computer?
you could still sync to the iRiver. It
Right.
just dumped the files in a folder.
Yeah, but I
The only
thought it
way to
had to
find
go through like an iTunes software or a Windows Media Player software in order to get it in there.
I don't remember, but I know that
Mhm.
the iPod at some point supported any type of USB device.
Ah,
So,
yeah,
because on the iPod originally, you had to go through I no, was it? Yeah, you had to use iTunes with iPodder to get the media on because there
right.
was no other you couldn't dump it directly via the iPodder to the device. It had to go
Correct.
through iTunes, then synced.
Correct,
Yeah.
and I believe that the connections, even in the MP3 players, worked with, I believe they worked with Windows Media Player too, right?
Maybe you're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
anyway, it was clunky. It wasn't automated. You just, you had to have your device plugged in order to make
mhm.
sure it was synced in the morning. I think
So
iPod automatically ran. There was a script that would run at certain 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever. Would pull down the newest podcasts that were in its directory, and then it would initiate a Apple script call to
to
iTunes
synchronize it, right.
and synchronize it. How we got the media onto the media devices. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes you'd have to manually sync it. Um, but
Well, keep in mind there were still people back in that time frame that were connecting to this stuff on dial-up connections.
right, and
So,
there was no way I could at that time afford an iPod. I was that was a big
right.
that was a big item. That would have been like buying a television or something. It was very expensive, and I didn't have in the budget. So I had the poor man's device. It would hold like 8 episodes. I think it was
Right,
256 megs
right.
in the iPodder, and
R
or not in the iPodder, but the iRiver.
Yeah, so they
But
have pretty limited storage, so it's not like you could download a huge amount of shows. I think most people, maybe they had maybe 2 to 3 subscriptions in there, but as a podcaster, you had to be conscious of your file size.
oh,
I think
absolutely,
more than and that was a difficult balance back then too, 'cause, quality, was something that we were all trying to strive for too, but you were balancing it with file size. And, like a lot of the streams that I did back then were like 16K streams up to, and at some point it got up to 32K.
right.
And then and a lot of my downloads through this were encoded at the same bit rate. So 32K mono was about the most that I would ever do in an audio file back in that era. Yeah.
And I think too the challenge with for me, really was the show exploded,
Hmm.
and the even though the me, I was burning 500 gigs. It was not in the first week, but within a month. Well, that was weird. Within a month, I was 500 meg or 500 gigs of data within 3 days, putting a show online. So each
Yeah.
half dozen domains because I was buying. I had like 3 DreamHost accounts. I had a Bluehost, a couple of Bluehost accounts. I had,
Hmm.
because I had to, and really what I had to do is I was watching every day, and about the time the bandwidth was ready to be burned on that box that I was on, I would change the RSS feed, and I had a little script that I ran that basically changed actually the media URL to every host because so I had media uploaded like I have to different hosting locations. So it wasn't just uploading
Hmm.
to one place. There was like 7 or 8 places I was up, and then, praying, and I would wake up some mornings where the bandwidth would be burned out, and I would, they just until the end of the month, and the only thing was on
Right.
there was media. I had like and to get away from having those accounts taken, um, an HTML document that went on every page. It basically kind of had a playlist so that they
Mm.
would not think that I was just hosting the media. They would say, "Oh, there's a play." But, people coming to, if they'd look at the logs, they'd have known it wasn't a browser coming to that playlist. It was some sort of automated scripter. But yeah,
Mhm.
so changing those URL, that was the,
Yeah.
you just wasn't, shows had to be continually, and I did that for months and months and
Yeah.
months of rotating servers. And the bigger the show got, I had, that was where my big expense came in those early days, because those were not cheap. Those were like three, four hundred
So did you
dollars a
go
year.
Yeah. So did you go out and get, like a co-hosting deal with a big hosting platform, or did you create your own servers?
Well, I was not didn't know anything. I was using shared hosting accounts.
Shared
So
hosting,
I would
right?
buy a shared hosting account with, let's say, DreamHost, put some domain on it that I would like, gncpodcast1.com, gncpodcast2.com. And each of those had their own domains.
Mhm.
And then the main site, I would just update the feed and repoint at different media. I'd have to update the media URL.
Mhm.
So it was crazy. I mean, it was really, in those early days, just to keep the show on. Me, it got, really expensive. I think I had $2,000 or $3,000 in annual
Yeah.
hosting bills for that first
Yeah.
year. And then, of
Yeah,
course,
it was very expensive to do much with the internet back in those days, and
yeah,
that's one of the reasons why I had to build my own server infrastructure. I had 4 servers in 2 different co-locations facilities that I built and installed, got set up with routers and all that stuff, and got the bandwidth licensed, multiple T1s going to these servers, and I was actually hosting other people back in those days,
yeah,
streaming and all that stuff. So that's what I had to do to keep costs down, believe it or not,
right,
because
right,
doing like what you were doing was just like, I mean, it was like $2,000 a month just to get, what I needed to just deliver my
right,
just my radio show.
yeah.
So in order for me to get it cost effective, I had to build my own servers. I had to manage it, all that stuff,
I
and
wasn't that
and
geeky,
yeah,
so I didn't, I
right.
finally went to a dedicated server about a year in,
Hmm.
and that ended up its own challenges, because I had to hire
Yeah.
someone to set it up and manage it, and because I didn't know Linux, I didn't have a clue. And so those early days were
Yeah.
challenging. So it was no wonder that in the early days you really had to be a total geek to do podcasts,
Oh, yeah.
and just
Yeah.
the barrier to entry was nearly impossible.
Well, and it was so expensive to get into it because everything was new.
Hmm.
They were charging a lot for very limited, connectivity. Um, that there was just so many barriers to being able to scale,
Yeah.
back in those days, and that's what drove me to doing what I did. And my new website that I had built just, you know, in the middle of podcasting starting, was actually built under a deal that I'd done with a Ukraine company, website building company. This company, what was interesting about this company is this company was a global website development company, which worked 24 hours, 7 days a week, because
Wow.
they had developers scattered all over the world, and so they were always working on projects all around the world because they had different developers. But it was based out of the Ukraine, and they built me a website, and it was a custom WordPress blog is what it was.
Hmm.
Had all these custom components to it,
Oh yeah.
and and it was something I launched right at that time, and added enclosures. They had no idea what I was asking for. I said, I want the enclosure tag added to my RSS, and they were like, "What's that?" Back in
Now,
those
one thing
days,
that's
because
interesting is
yeah,
there was a reference in James' article to RSS.92,
right,
and really enclosure tag. until RSS 2.0.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, I think it was still an experimentation tag, that Dave
yeah,
Weiner was still still pushing for. Yeah.
but
So,
it's yeah,
yeah,
it's just
I mean,
thank God those days are behind us. But it was here um
yeah,
about it
with
in the
James and
in the
yeah.
past about this, but
Mhm.
it's here I'm 3 days away from 17 years, and you're over 17 years now, so
Yep.
it's it's amazing that the space is where it is at today, and you
Yeah.
have you have look at this. You got one of the biggest social media companies in the world, or the biggest, that's just added podcasting support fully on pages, and
Mhm.
um, we'll see how that traction grows over time. Not in of course, Facebook didn't even exist. Twitter didn't exist.
Right.
None of those
Right.
platforms
None of
existed.
these platforms existed back then. Right.
So, you had to do your own, it was really back to the things I always kind of laugh about are when people complain about having a hard time growing a show or building it. Yeah, we may
Mhm.
have been early, but we had no platform. Our platform was do what we could to drive people there and get attraction. And the directories were really, really important for discovery in those early days. That's how people found you, was Podcast Alley and Podcast Pickle and all of those sites that popped up that were actually the early syndicators even before Apple joined the party in July of 2005.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 Those were the early days, and then there was audio too that wasn't really mentioned in the
Yeah.
doesn't get mentioned much in the timeline of podcasting too, that then, um, converted over to becoming Twitter. So, there's, the audio software, the founders of Twitter actually tried to sell the audio software. Actually, a company I was working for back in 2005 in the podcasting space, wanted to buy that software
So did I, but it was
from
they had
from Twitter. I
insane
think it was
money.
like $1 million.
It's
Yeah, I think it was like
crazy.
a million. Well, Ev wanted to reimburse his investors in audio because, I mean, basically when Apple Podcasts or Apple iTunes launched back then, it basically killed audio. So he basically got out of it and tried to get his money back to the investors so they would feel good about him and invest in his new project, Twitter. So I
Yeah.
don't know that I can remember who wound up buying that code, but I think it was
I don't think
some
anybody did.
company out of
I don't think it
Chicago.
went anywhere because it wasn't
I think a company out of
relaunched as
Chicago
a.
actually bought it.
Oh, did it?
Did it?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
I don't
You'll have to go Google and
yeah, I just don't remember. I know that the company that I was working for at the time that threw in a bid on it, didn't win the bid, so, yeah.
yeah, I just wish I would have bought more domain names in those early days. I was slow. I should have bought yeah, I bought a lot, but I bought a lot of the wrong ones.
Right, right. So so James is gonna do some more articles on these themes of looking back and trying to document, what happened, because there's been a lot of discussion over the 17 years about origin stories, and
Yep.
I think that there's been some
People trying to change the
s
story.
some Pinocchio noses going on
Right.
this topic, so it's good to have somebody that's kinda got a unbiased view tell the story,
Hmm.
because there's been issues with Wikipedia in this area.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, and there's been all sorts of conflicts over the years around this stuff. Um, and there's other areas that we haven't even gotten into yet. This is just the beginning. So, but
So I'm
anyways,
sure there'll be some naysayers out there that says this isn't how it happened, but uh,
I think this is as
I don't
accurate as
know.
I can
Yeah,
see
for
it,
me, this is as accurate
just
as I
based
can
on my
remember. Yeah.
own experience being back in that time.
Here's
but,
the thing that's lucky is we have audio clips and stuff that we can go back and reference. That's like he linked
yeah.
up in the article. The challenge that the analogy I give is post 9/11. I was involved in a combat operation that um, resulted ultimately 20 plus years later in two people getting the Medal of Honor. And so when they're doing this Medal of Honor vetting, they basically come and interview you 20 years post haste and say, what do you remember of that night? And you have to describe everything that you remember from 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And then they flip the laptop around and say, okay, here's the video, and let's realign what you remember to what we have for ground truth. And then so they're basically what they did was they tried to validate it. So even at over 20 years, as an example, um John Roberts, the SEAL that died that night, I remember him being on the right hand side of the outcropping, where he was actually on the left. So it was just one of those things where after 20 years your brain don't remember. And so this
Yeah.
is why it's important that this stuff is all documented, because should have done I did it in my book. Job of all this history is really going to be important, maybe to somebody, maybe it's only important to us, but let's say podcasting evolves over the next 30 years, then we have a written proof. It's on the internet. It won't die. And so I'm sure someone will come in and dispute our stuff as well. But um,
I don't know though, Todd. I think that I think there's not as many people that are involved in the podcasting medium today that were from back then, right? I think we've seen a lot of new people come into the medium, and there's not as many reference points out there anymore, and those dwindle over decades, right? People leave the industry, people pass away, people forget, all these things, and the evidence disappears. I mean, fortunately, I was able to, resurrect some of my old episodes that talked about this stuff, and my conversations back in those days with Adam Curry. I did like an hour and a half conversation with him about the podcasting medium back then, so that's still available online. I know you did stuff with him as well, but to try and document this stuff from the guys that really started it, is important, I think, because eventually, if this medium keeps growing the way it's growing, it's going to have its own kind of museum or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if there's that for television or for I think it's in the Smithsonian, but at some point it'll podcasting is a new medium and it will find a place in history. Right. Oops, I lost you, Todd. I can't hear you anymore. Did you actually accidentally turn off your mic? No. Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I could, I could hear you fine before, but I can't hear you now. So something changed.
how about now? Am I back?
Okay. Yep. You're back now.
It refreshed the page, so something they must have noticed there
Oh,
wasn't. I was going to say what Sean said was that Apple's initial protectiveness over Pod got Leo Laporte into using the word netcast. And he goes on to say Audio had the best embeddable media player, worked on MySpace, and something called Sonic Mountain bought Audio in 2007. Don't think it ever went anywhere.
yeah. Sonic Mountain. Yeah. Okay. That
So
makes
there was
sense.
a lot of companies that have come and gone in the space,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
abruptly.
Yeah. And it's interesting how the ideas kind of, and we talk about this a lot and it makes us look like curmudgeons, but a lot of ideas come and go and then
Yeah.
come and go and then come and go. over and over again, and you wonder if this time that idea is gonna catch on, you know? So, which to new people, that can sound a little weird because it's like, "Well, you should be open to new ideas." So I go, "Well, unfortunately, it's not new."
Yeah. So I'm
So,
breaking all the rules today, Rob. I'm on Wi-Fi. I've got 3 or 4 windows open with the streams going. This poor
okay,
little MacBook is, working hard
right.
bandwidth-wise, and,
That's
I
alright.
may have to actually stop the YouTube, playback. Not I mean, the whoops, what's going on here? Don't wanna do that.
Well, the
Yeah.
good thing is that with, Riverside, it's locally recorded, so
Yeah, yeah, so the master
the
recording will be okay.
the audio should be good no matter what we experience here.
Yeah.
So, right. So that's good. But, so I can give a little quick update on what's going on with the Podcast Academy. We had our board meeting today, and, the AMBs are pushing forward, going forward for next year, and in partnership with, Podcast Movement at the Evolutions Conference. The AMBs are gonna happen a day before the beginning of, Podcast Movement in Los Angeles. So it's coming together quite rapidly. So,
We
yep,
had our podcast award ceremony last Wednesday, International
yep,
Podcast Day, so it went
yep,
off well. Seems like everything was well received, except for me destroying a few names in the titles, but that's par for the course. So
right, right, yeah,
I think overall pretty successful. I know you guys are taking applications at the AMBIes
mhm.
for people to apply for an AMB.
Yeah, we're we're trying to find a good, awards host too. One that's a podcaster, one that people are familiar with, and one that's, people like, and that's funny, and there's just a lot of criteria to try and find somebody that's, a good fit to host one of these things.
Oh, I'd
Um,
love to see that criteria list. I bet you that's a ball of laughs.
well, it's a tough thing to do because you're trying to balance a bunch of priorities, and it's hard to find somebody that checks all the boxes. But you do wanna think about that kinda stuff, at least for the type of show that we're looking to put on. So, it's gonna be live on a stage with an audience of probably a couple 100 people, hopefully. Um, so it'll be
Well, I would hope it
interesting.
would be more than that with it being held in conjunction with the evolutions. You should have 2,000 people in the room.
Well, it's the day before the conference,
But people get in the day before.
yeah. But I think also you have to be modest too. You can't go rent like, the Forum or something like that, not knowing, you know, how many
Well,
people are actually gonna show
they've
up,
got a big
so
stage area for their main speakers. You're not doing
oh,
it
no,
there.
it's an outside venue. It's not gonna be as part of the same same facility because it needs to be like a TV production, thing, and it's not Podcast Movement doesn't have that ability, so,
Well, when they did the Hall of Fame,
yeah.
it was pretty
Yeah,
TV-esque.
well, not exactly what we're looking for. So but the Podcast Movement folks are going to be running it, so they
So what's
actually
the
are
word
the
on the Hall of Fame? Any word on the Hall of Fame?
I've reached out to Dan repeatedly on this topic, and he's assured me over the last year that, it's a priority for Evolutions. So,
Hey,
I
Dan,
haven't
you need
what's
someone to take it over, let me know.
right.
Well,
And, and though I haven't heard any specific movement on that initiative. So, I think it's safe to say, we should we should keep Dan in our minds on this topic if we want to keep it alive. Right.
hmm. Yeah, it's kind of weird because I've been approached by at least two different, now three different parties that are interested in doing something with the podcast awards. But I often feel like they're putting their hand in my pocket, and want something for nothing. And
Right.
at this point, that's not going to happen. And it's also got to be the right fit. So, but
Mhm.
there's some great awards groups out there that have big teams, that could take it to a whole different level. But, you know, am I willing to just, give it up and let it go? I don't know at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as the podcast awards, right. The People's Choice Podcast Awards. Um, yeah, I think the Hall of Fame probably belongs with an independent organization like a podcast movement. I can't think of anybody else.
It's hard, and the thing is, they have a system that would work if it was turned over to someone, and as long as someone implemented the same system, I think it would work.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I would love to see it with the Podcast Academy, but, I don't think that they have an appetite for it at this point.
well, you guys, you're early days yet for that, so maybe there
Mhm.
has to be some, you know, maybe Dan and team feels like you guys got to prove yourselves or something. I don't know.
Well, no, I think they wanted to keep it, quite honest with you. I mean,
Oh,
that was the impression that I got from from them was that th they started it. It was kind of their initiative. They said that the reason they didn't hold it in the past was because they didn't have any sponsors, but, we've I've told them that I think that we have multiple people that are willing to sponsor it. We just need to, have a plan.
so
So
Rob, I may have. Let's see if this works. I'm on the internal speaker right now on the MacBook. That's what's going on. That's why my audio has changed. So let
mhm,
me try something.
yeah. Yeah, Todd's trying to change his audio a little bit here, so I'm not hearing him right now.
Yeah,
So,
I'm now
yeah,
on the default internal. This sucks. So I'm on the
yeah.
internal. Something happened in the ATR disappeared from the system, so
Mm.
that's why you couldn't hear me. So now I'm on. I don't need a microphone anymore. I'm
Oh,
on
you're
the
just
MacBook.
talking directly into the computer now, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
playing
yeah.
with this here. See if it'll let me go. No, it's not letting me go back. Yeah, good old Riverside. This is the first time it's ever failed me. So who knows?
Yeah.
So I
So I thought it
apologize
was
for the audio quality, everyone.
yeah, I thought it was interesting that James Cridland chose to show a Zune on the cover of, yeah, I mean, he didn't really identify it, of what it was that he was showing, on the newsletter from the 5th, as part of the why do we call it a podcast, and why he showed a, Zune 60, um, on there. That's that brown Zune.
Yeah,
So, because that didn't exist until mid 2006, so it was a little bit out of context. So I think it should have been probably a, a big fat thick iPod. So it's probably what that image should have been.
those that didn't have one of those early day iPods, you'll be surprised there was actually a hard drive inside it. There
It
was
was
no
actually
solid
yeah, it
state
was
memory.
physically yeah, like an old
There was a
school
physical,
spinning hard drive.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's spinning hard drive that you carried around in your pocket.
yeah. Well, you can see what Apple was doing. Apple was repurposing a hard drive that they used in their Macs and just added it to a
Well,
portable
it
player
was a
device.
laptop, hard drive, and then there was
Right.
a battery layer, and then it was pretty ingenious at the time if you think about what they did there, and it was heavy.
Yeah, it was. Well, because those spinning discs were metal back in those days.
Yeah,
So,
there was no solid state memory. The solid state memory was, like, limited to, like,
yeah.
megabytes, not gigabytes.
Plus, Todd, didn't you have to be a little bit careful in handling that thing? Because hard drives back in those days had like arms
Yeah, they
inside
had
of
put
them,
some
right?
safety into it, but yeah, you had to be careful with it.
Because if you were to drop that thing, you probably would knock it was almost like a phonograph, right? Um, where it has an arm that goes across a disc,
Right.
right? Kind of like a needle on an LP.
Yeah, you didn't
So,
you don't want it
yeah,
you didn't want to have dropped it for sure.
right, right, yeah. It's funny to think about it back in those days. Even those hard drives were like, I don't know what was the capacity, maybe 5 megabytes or something like that. I think back in the early days of those iPods. Um, yeah, so they didn't really hold much. Oh, I lost you again, Todd.
Bytes.
Oh, it
So,
wasn't gigabytes. Was
yeah.
it like a couple of gigabytes? I can't
It's
remember.
like 120 or something like that. It wasn't a lot, but
Oh,
it
no,
was
no, I'm
still
talking
pretty
about
good.
the first one that was available to be used with podcasting.
Um,
So
First
that was back in
iPod
2005, right?
storage limit.
Uh,
The first
In
iPod had 5 gigs of music, so it
five
was
gigs.
5 gigs.
That was, that was quite a bit, actually.
Yep, 399.
Given that the MP3 players that were generally sold in that time frame,
Yep,
I think had just
256
maybe,
megs.
yeah,
Yeah,
un, under a gig, but they
yeah,
were also a lot smaller too.
yeah,
And I believe that those were the early solid state ones,
yeah.
right? So,
So the first generation of they had a 1 gig model, and a 1 gig model based on Apple's estimation of 4 minutes per song at 128 kilobits. But yeah, um, but then they increase relatively quickly from, they went up in size very, very quickly, the second and third generation of iPods. I have several. I wish I had more. Those are kind of collector items now.
hmm so Todd, did you see the post in Pod News today about the Gen Z survey
Yeah, I
done
did.
by done by Transistor, talking about 13 to 23 year olds um,
Prefer
are
Spotify.
are wanting to promote Spotify and not Apple Podcasts.
Yep.
So,
I gotta be careful what I say here. I had a call with Apple Monday or Tuesday.
mhm.
Yesterday, maybe it was Monday, and had a great discussion. Some of their new team members were, or not somebody, relatively new on the team, and it was more of a just kind of a catch up. And I won't go into any of the details of the call, except I think that they really want to make sure that um, they're worried about podcasters having a good experience on the platform. And we talked about a few things that we'd seen that were, you know, and at least on those, I think they got a lot of stuff on their roadmap
So
that
did you
is going to.
see this article that came out? YouTube looks to hire its first executive focused on podcasts.
Well,
That's an
why? I
interesting.
guess we
Yeah,
shouldn't be surprised. Um, what are they looking to do? Buy some exclusive content over there, or what?
I don't know. I think it's an interesting question purely from the standpoint YouTube and not
Right.
right. I th- I think that there may be a little bit of a need for some leadership on the Google side. I don't know if this is really you take the word YouTube and you just substitute it as Google. Um, I'm not really sure if that's what's maybe being misinterpreted here, um, but I do think that there has been an increased interest in podcasting on YouTube. That's been building for many years, though. I mean, I've had these conversations about YouTube being an important player in podcasting, going all the way back to 2013.
Yeah, I
Um,
think everyone has mixed results. I think it's what you put into it, just like anything else.
well, it is different. It's a different model, but it's also, people are searching for content over there, so I guess it does make sense. And there are a lot of podcasters that are publishing videos over there. Either they're primarily, I think it's about focus, right? It's some podcasters are primarily video, and they just happen to put out their audio as a podcast, and then there's others that are primarily audio, and they happen to put out their video. So I think it depends on which side of the spectrum that you're looking at YouTube, and I think. But I do know that there's been some changeover in leadership on the Google side, on the Google podcast side. So I do kind of wonder if they hire somebody on YouTube that maybe that's kind of putting a cart before the horse a little bit.
Well, as Sean says in the chat, they said they rolled Google Play Music into YouTube, maybe they rolled Google Podcasts into it as well.
So I guess that's the place where all the content goes. So does that mean that we see Google Podcasts turn into YouTube podcasts and it's not in Google
Well, they
anymore? Or
didn't. I think they have YouTube Music, but I'm not. Maybe I don't know. I'll have to look. I don't know. I don't use YouTube Music products, so
right. So I think it's probably worth it to check in with those folks, but maybe they're and have them back on the show again, but maybe it's too early. maybe they're maybe they're still trying to figure it out.
or if they probably won't even tell us if they did get on the show. So
Right.
from that perspective, it
Because Zach is no longer there and he's been on the show before. Um,
well, it's worthy of a reach out. I don't
yeah.
even think I have contact with the new person that's over there.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. But yeah. So it's interesting. And I think Google has a huge opportunity that feels like that they had a lot of momentum, but it feels like they've lost that momentum a little bit.
Well, Spotify's taken a lot of the limelight away, and then they just haven't been proactive. I think
Hmm.
we continue to see Google growth, more people, they're number three. So why, it's disappointing it hasn't grown as fast as it has, but they have, again, they haven't brought the 800-pound gorilla to bear yet either. And their hands are tied. And we've talked about this on the show many times.
Hmm.
From an OEM standpoint, like their Pixel, they could probably very easily put a podcast app on the Pixel because they don't have to ask anybody permission for that. That's their phone. But
Right.
you're not going to get, to get a Google Podcast app on the OEM version of the Android, that's you got to negotiate with every single OEM to put that next app on. And they're
Yeah.
already taking a lot of heat in the EU for this very reason, for the bundle.
Right.
Matter of fact, they're crying about Apple and they've been fined because of this. So for them to add another app at this point is could be political carnage in some countries for them.
Yeah. Hey, Todd, have you seen much uptake in the Samsung podcast app?
I haven't looked stats wise.
Yeah, I haven't looked lately either. My guess is that I don't think we've seen a big uptake.
Yeah, it's definitely whatever. It hasn't busted 1%. That's kind of my criteria for taking a closer look at stuff. But
Yeah, and I think that we could see Facebook bump that 1% here soon.
depends on right now it's podcasts are largely available on mobile, so on Facebook. So it's not like I think you can get to it. I was gonna look here. Let's see here. Let's see if I can do this without disrupting the apple cart, without losing things here. Let's see, go to the groups, actually pages. And let me go to, because I've got the new media show. The new media show page has the podcast added to it, but there's really, from a desktop view, yeah, see, you really can't get to it. It's all via the web app. I mean, the mobile app. You really don't
Mhm.
see podcasts on the desktop.
Mhm.
There's really no way to.
Right.
You see, let me look at this. Yeah, it's not photos, videos, reviews. Yeah, I do not see. So maybe some of the stuff that I haven't reviewed, I got from Facebook today. Maybe there's some instructions in there how to find it with because yeah, the only thing that's on the podcast link right now is add your podcast. It's not. There's nothing there for it to be seen. I think a lot of people use Facebook on the desktop. So not everyone, of course, but I think a lot of people do. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I think Facebook's pretty big on mobile.
Well, it's a big on mobile, but
Yeah.
it'd also be nice to have the podcast available on the desktop. But maybe
It'd be interesting to oh, go ahead, Todd.
they put video on the desktop. Why wouldn't they put the audio?
Well, because podcasts are seen as a mobile consumption would be the only reason, and I believe that's what Facebook has been prioritizing is mobile experiences
Yeah.
so far.
Eileen
Um,
says, I'm glad you talked about the Facebook page feature. I love how we create 30-second clips. The animation looks very cool. I haven't seen that feature yet,
mhm.
Eileen.
Yeah, so sampling is a big priority for those
So
folks.
did you do that, Eileen? Did you do that via the mobile app or via your desktop?
I think it's only mobile.
Yeah, there is the RSS feeds are connected on the new media show page. They've been connected for a long time. So again, if they make it hard to get to,
So you've created a a page on Pages in Facebook for the new media show?
yeah, new media show has a page. We've had a page for years.
No, 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 but is it a podcast page that has a list of all the episodes?
Every page that's in Facebook now has the ability to add a podcast to it. There's a podcast tab now
Right, right.
on a page.
Yes, you can cut and paste the RSS feed
Right.
into Facebook, and it will
Yeah.
create a separate page.
Right.
Right,
Yeah, well, what it'll be is it'll be something you'll see on mobile. So let me see if
right,
I can actually find it on my
right.
mobile phone. So let's see
And
here.
and they're gonna keep building this out. I mean, this isn't the end. This is the beginning for these folks, but as like we've seen with Google and other companies that have entered the space too, it's keeping them innovating, keeping them improving, um, based on uptake, and it just takes consistent effort and consistent PR. I don't know that I think Google gave up on it a little bit too soon to some degree. I don't know if they gave up. It was more like they just took the gas off.
Well,
Right.
that's interesting. For Geek News Central, the podcast link is there. So
So did you actually add the RSS feed to
yeah,
the
so
page?
I did.
Okay.
So I don't know why.
But it's not just a link, does it
It's
show
no, what it
all
is it shows up in the bottom as a menu item, and I don't see it as a menu item. So I don't know why it's not there, because if I go to the actual page, and manage a page, it's been added. So who knows
yeah. So it's still
why?
early on this. Yeah.
And also, a lot of people got invites to shows that were not their shows on their Facebook pages.
Mhm.
So they actually belong to someone else. We got a whole
Right.
bunch of Blueberry just because we're a host. I think that somehow they got related to Blueberry for some reason. Well, there was 3 or 4. And I basically
Yeah.
there's a way you can decline those, and we declined them as being the owners of them.
So Fireside Chat just released a bunch of upgrades, and it looks like things are starting to ramp up over there. They did launch the Libsyn podcast publishing integration just yesterday.
Mhm.
So the Fireside Chat is picking up new shows. They have support for video in there, live video, and you can push it out to live streaming platforms, just like what we're doing here. So it's not just in the Fireside Chat app. So you can get it out on Twitch, and you can get it out on I believe YouTube and those places as a live show. So on the video side. So they keep progressing, making updates, and they're attracting more content creators to the platform. So it seems to be building out. Who knows what kind of listenership traction the app has, but maybe if you look at the bigger picture of it, maybe the listenership traction isn't so much in the Fireside Chat app. It's going to be external distribution is where the audience is going to be. So we'll see.
Yeah. Sorry.
So it looks like iHeartRadio is still showing up as the number one podcast network in the PodTrack top US podcast publishers for September. I guess they added 29 million global downloads last month and also added 30 new shows.
Mostly radio stations.
Well, I don't know that the radio stations actually do that great on the podcasting side. So I think it's going to be probably more podcast originals is probably
And
driving a lot of
and
those
yet
numbers.
and yet I don't even have the iHeart app on my phone, so
Yeah, I mean, those aren't necessarily exclusives. I think that they're distributed widely. But yeah, I mean, and just keep in mind, PodTrack is just tracking their customers. They're not tracking the whole industry. So it's never a complete snapshot. It's it's mainly a bunch of radio networks, but it has some podcast only networks too. So, but it's a tracking that tracks kind of more larger media companies is what I would
mm.
say. Yeah, mostly.
Well, Rob, maybe a little slow news day here, a little technical difficulties. Maybe we should wrap it up early today.
Okay, we can do that, and then make a big build up for next week when
Yeah,
when we can really get into the weeds about what's going on with Facebook. So
yeah, that should be good, and they'll bring their perspective, and that'd be a great show to talk with the Facebook team. Have we finalized on who's? Did you said earlier who's coming?
well, at this point, it's been proposed to bring on a product manager and a marketing manager
Okay,
for for Facebook podcasts. So we're going to get it direct from the horse's mouth, as they say.
all right. If you guys have questions for Facebook, what you should do is you should send them to Rob and I in advance so we can ask them on the on the show. And of course,
Right.
I'll be back in the studio next week. Hopefully, I'm not on some emergency run back to Honolulu to have some stuff taken out. And so they're saying they'll if it turns out that if this thing turns out to be cancerous, that they'll want me under the knife immediately. So we'll see what that really means. That mean 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 days? Who knows?
Can they know before you leave?
They're rushing the test results,
Hmm.
so we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Uh, it's just like
That
anything else. Everyone's a rush.
Yep.
when it comes to this kind of stuff. So you just have, here's a crazy thing. It took me 5 months to get the appointment. So, you know,
Yeah.
so I
I've been
don't think
playing that
this,
game for a while myself, so I know exactly what you're saying. It can be long time frames getting
yeah.
stuff like this taken care of. Yep.
Okay. Well,
All
everyone,
right,
thanks.
Todd. Thank you.
I'm Todd.
All right.
I'm Todd at blueberry.com, at Geek News on Twitter. Sorry about the audio, everyone. Something failed here. I have no idea what.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
follow,
you'll be
subscribe
back
to the
in the
show.
studio next week.
Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah. On a wired connection, not on Wi-Fi.
Yeah. So, and I'm Rob Greenlee, and I can certainly be found online at robgreenlee.com. I can be reached in email robg@lipson.com, and certainly welcome to send an email, communicate anything to us about what you see happening in the podcasting medium and any tips or anything like that. And we'll keep the sources confidential. But we we love to be a resource. I tried to get the show set to be down at Podfest coming up here in Tampa, but the details of it haven't worked out or didn't work out. But we're going to keep trying to do this show live at podcasting conferences as much as we can, and see if we can get that done. It's a tough climate to do that kind of stuff nowadays, isn't it, Todd?
You can't drop a conference on with like 4 weeks notice and,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
expect, yeah,
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
have a small event. It's hard. So we'll wait for Podfest to have their big event, their real big event. Maybe we can
Yeah,
do
it'll
it
be
there.
next year. Yeah.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
everyone. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next week, same time at New Media Show at 3 o'clock Eastern. And we'll be back in the studio next week. But make sure you follow or subscribe to the show.